Well, right now, and because of the Turner Prize 2014 live show, it's a shorter Channel 4 news tonight. Here's Jon Snow with a half-hour programme.
The worst of paedophiles, the paediatrician jailed for 22 years for sex crimes against his own child cancer patients. Good evening. Canadian police tipped off Britain's online child protection force about Dr. Miles Bradbury 16 long months before they did anything about him. In that time, he abused and assaulted more children. Tonight, the former boss of the agency blames Home Office policy for starving child protection of adequate resources. Also tonight, 15 billion in extra road building. Haven't we heard it all before? A new road to take a tunnel dive below Stonehenge, as the M62 is promised an upgrade for the 21st century. The worst violence since Hong Kong's protests began, amid government warnings of severe action against further demonstrations. And tenants protest outside the offices of a US property company they fear will hike their rent to unaffordable levels. Some high-profile support on show.
What kind of rent are you paying?
Oh, I'm not interested in talking to you about my rent, mate. I'm here to support a very, very important campaign, and you, as a member of the media, have an important duty to help to represent these people.
It was a campaign of abuse described by the judge as prolonged, cruel and persistent. Today, a hospital consultant who sexually abused seriously ill children in Cambridge was jailed for 22 years. Dr. Miles Bradbury admitted abusing 18 boys, but it was his purchase of a video of underage boys which raised questions tonight. The government's online child protection unit failed to tell police about information it had on Bradbury 16 months earlier, as Jane Death now reports.
Dr. Miles Bradbury. To children with illnesses like leukemia, he was the hero doctor. But while they were fighting to stay alive, he was destroying their lives for his own sexual gratification. The judge said Bradbury's cruel abuse had caused boys and their parents trauma, fear and distress. The lawyer for the victims said Bradbury hid behind his status as a doctor.
This man was trusted because of the position of authority that he held, and that was disgracefully abused, which has had a horrendous impact, particularly in the lives of those children who have had to return to hospital because of their medical conditions. It must also be borne in mind that some children have sadly passed away because of their conditions, and for them, justice was not witnessed today.
This was Miles Bradbury the day he admitted abusing his patients.
I'm so sorry.
In Addenbrooke's hospital, he assaulted boys behind a curtain under the guise of medical examinations, sometimes with their unsuspecting parents in the same room. He also used pens containing cameras to film the boys as they undressed. Police found many of the boys were simply too young to understand that what the doctor was doing was wrong.
The children were just describing what they thought were normal examinations. The explaining to the families afterwards that actually what they thought was normal was actually a sexual offence was the part that was quite difficult.
This couple's son was treated by Bradbury. They're terrified of what he might have done.
You just can't believe your child's got cancer, and then this on top of it.
To abuse the situation that he was in is just sickening.
All the time, no one suspected the trusted doctor. It fell to Canadian police to see him for what he really was. 2 years ago, they were investigating people who'd bought a video of young boys and found more than 2,000 of the customers were British, including Bradbury. They sent the names to the UK's Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre. CEOP put Bradbury down as low risk, even though he worked with children. And they didn't tell local police about him for more than a year. Time for Bradbury to carry on abusing children. Canadian police say CEOP dropped the ball. It failed children. At Addenbrooke's hospital, they're appalled.
You know, we're very angry that we weren't made aware of that information. At an individual, personal level, at a professional level, it has affected us profoundly, and we're just so incredibly sorry.
Of the thousands of suspects British authorities were warned about, around 50 have been charged. Miles Bradbury got rid of his laptop's hard drive before police could get to him. How many films of children were on there? Police say it's naive to think we know the real scale of his abuse.
Jane Death reporting. Earlier I spoke to the former chief executive of CEOP, Jim Gamble. I began by asking him about this case.
I think the consequences of his activity are as bad as anything I've seen. There's lots of predatory paedophiles out there who by their very nature offend, but his breach of trust and his fall from grace, where he was seen as that almost godlike character, rescuing children from, cancer, no more awful disease can you think of. This is despicable, and my heart goes out to the families of the children involved in this.
But it also sounds as if it's a bit of the downfall of the very agency of which you led, which seems not to have responded adequately to Canadian warnings.
Well, I can't defend that. I think there's been an error. The risk assessment clearly hasn't identified him as a physician, someone whose job gives them intimate and trusting access to children, a paediatrician at that. I'd like, though, to put in context what I think the issue is, and that is too few people with far too much work to do. In my time, John, there were 650 reports a month. At this time, I'm led to believe that there were 1,800 reports a month. And due to decisions made by this government, CEOP was withering on the vine in 2011, 12 and 13. It was in that vacuum between ending what it was and waiting to become part of the National Crime Agency. This Home Secretary made decisions. She made a decision not to listen to what anyone in the child protection community said when she diverted it in the direction she did.
To use your word, in this scenario, children are at risk right now because our systems are not good enough to deal with it.
They most certainly are at risk, and we don't know what the legacy is of those 3 years when a vacuum was clearly in place. And we need to, if this was a local authority, a local borough, we'd have a serious case review. We'd be looking at those involved in the decisions that were made that directly or indirectly led to this. If we're going to take child protection seriously, if we want victims to really look at what's being done by those in leadership positions, they have to be judged by what they do, not the rhetoric they say. And coming out and saying, we take child protection seriously, and rolling out statistics to baffle and blind people is not good enough in this case.
Jim Gamble, thank you very much indeed. Inevitably, therefore, we asked the Home Office for an interview, but were told no one was available. In a statement, they told us that CEOP was brought into the National Crime Agency to ensure child abuse investigators have access to the agency's extensive crime-fighting resources and global expertise. They go on to say that the work of the NCA and police forces resulted in more than 1,300 individuals being sentenced for crimes involving indecent images of children last year alone. Later in the programme, we'll be speaking to the mother of a young boy who was killed by an internet predator. Breck Bredner was stabbed to death by 19-year-old Lewis Daines, who met and groomed him online. His mother tried to get help from the police 2 months before the attack. The Chancellor, George Osborne, appears to be on a pre-Christmas spending spree over the weekend. His gift of funding was to the NHS. Today, $15 billion has been pledged to improving our roads, a promise that was first announced last year. The coalition says its roads revolution is key to our prosperity. But with the Chancellor way off his borrowing targets, where is the money coming from? Our economics editor Paul Mason has this.
Neolithic man hauled 30-ton blocks of stone from Wales over grassland. 21st century man is plagued by single-lane highways, bottlenecks and A roads that strike dread into those who use them. David Cameron arrived at Stonehenge today to announce a big new road investment totalling £15 billion. Here, there'll be a tunnel under the Great Stone Circle. But why the spending spree when we're cutting public money elsewhere?
The budget deficit is down by 1/3 under this government, and we'll see what happens on Wednesday at the autumn statement. But the fact is, we've got the nation's finances under control, and so it makes sense to spend money on long-term investments like road and rail schemes, improvements at our ports, things that will make our economy grow faster and spread prosperity to every part of our country.
The money pledged today had been pledged already, so this was about who gets what. But with the government already borrowing £4 billion more this year than last, why now? With infrastructure, sometimes it's a case of build it and they will come. In Britain, after decades of underinvestment, that's not the case. As you can see from the road behind me, they want to come, but we haven't built it. And today's announcement follows some pretty clear political ley lines. The main upgrades are here along the A303 to South West England, the A27 in southern England, upgrades to the A1, the A47 which links the A1 to Great Yarmouth and all points between, and the M62. Coincidentally, all of these lead either to or through areas where UKIP came first in the Euro elections and to seats high on the party's target list. All over Britain you find small towns where people feel road infrastructure has passed them by. In Andover, 17 miles up the road from Stonehenge, news of the upgrade was welcomed.
Good for traffic.
Do you drive around here?
Yes.
And is it as bad as everybody says?
Around Stonehenge it is,
It's really bad?
Yeah.
So it'll help?
I think so.
I reckon it's a good thing.
You do?
Yeah.
What's it like driving around here?
Crazy.
It's interesting that David Cameron now spends his holiday in the West Country. He's probably been caught up in the queues. So that's probably a lot to do it.
But for Labour, whose leader was at a factory in Corby today, it was a case of government fumbling both on infrastructure and spending.
Well, re-announcing road schemes is not going to build a recovery that really works for working people. And the real story of this autumn statement is the truth is catching up with David Cameron and George Osborne, because they haven't built that recovery that works for working people. That's what people feel, and that's why they failed on the deficit.
Britain's A-roads are rubbish for a reason. We're already spending billions more than the taxman collects, and it's getting worse. Today's announcement follows extra money from the NHS yesterday, but it's a prelude to negative news in the autumn statement. In Wednesday's autumn statement, the Chancellor will most likely have to tell us that borrowing is going in the wrong direction. So today's announcement, and yesterday's, and tomorrow's are all about getting the good news out before that. Today, we know more about what the government wants to spend. As for what it wants to cut, that will be the subject of a bitter political fight in the run-up to the election.
Paul Mason, live to Gary Gibbon, Westminster. Gary, politics in this?
Just a bit. Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister virtually chasing each other down the A303 to get to Stonehenge first for the photo op. As Paul was saying there, a carefully choreographed sort of series of announcements. There's announcements, pre-announcements about the autumn statement. There's more tomorrow. Dan Alexander for the Lib Dems will be announcing some new spending on energy, flood defences, housing, all of this very carefully put together, along with the NHS stuff yesterday. And some Tories are wondering whether there'll actually be anything good to say on Wednesday, or whether actually the Chancellor has given up on that and is aware that that borrowing number Paul was talking about is going to be the real focus. I am told that around Whitehall they think George Osborne does still have a couple of surprises up his sleeve for Wednesday, something that could get at least about half the coverage, if not all of it, on the day. I'm also told that it's going to be a very slight fiscal tightening overall in this budget, keeping in with George Osborne's message he wants to get across to voters. The pain's not over yet, you better stick with us, don't change tack.
And briefly, Gordon Brown saying he'll stand down, and not entirely a surprise.
Not a surprise, no, he wasn't enjoying this, he wasn't having an Indian summer in the House of Commons, he was barely there. But interestingly, if it had been up to Ed Miliband, he might have had a comeback. Ed Miliband, when the leader of Scottish Labour stood down, decided that it might be a good idea if Gordon Brown went for that job. Gordon Brown didn't take long to decide that he didn't want it, but it will be one of the great what-ifs of British politics if the great clunking fist had come back in Scotland.
Gary Gibbon, we'll leave that in the air. Hong Kong's chief executive, Xi Leung, has warned that police have been tolerant, but they would now take resolute action. It follows some of the worst clashes between pro-democracy protesters and police since the demonstrations began 2 months ago. The protesters are defying orders to retreat. They want the people of Hong Kong to choose their leader without interference from Beijing. Our Asia correspondent, John Sparks, reports.
Protest leaders said the time had come to escalate their struggle as they surrounded government headquarters in the middle of Hong Kong. But as the sun rose, the police took their positions and with batons in hand decided to charge. Weeks of relative calm were shattered today as pro-democracy protesters were driven through a public park and back towards the main protest site in the heart of Hong Kong. One observer said it was like the running of the bulls. These the most violent clashes since demonstrators occupied parts of the city 2 months ago. The police made 40 arrests and dozens of people were injured, with activists accusing the police of brutality.
Because we don't have any weapon, we just have no weapon.
The territory's government is running out of patience, as are members of the police. Their moderate approach to the protesters discarded today. Here officers clear out a city underground station as a student leader begs fellow supporters to retreat. "Don't fight, fall back," she says. The protest movement now giving ground. Its call for open elections has been rejected and a request for talks with the government ignored. Today, a senior official told them to pack up and go home.
The police, after repeated warnings, have to take resolute actions. They have no choice because it is their duty to restore law and order.
Last night, protest leaders called for peaceful disobedience at the main government building, but what they got was chaos as both sides traded blows, as well as territory. But most here know the final clearance is inevitable. It seems this popular movement, symbolised by the umbrella, will soon be swept aside.
John Sparks. This is a tragedy that highlights the true power and danger of the internet. 14-year-old Brek Bednar was stabbed to death on his mother's birthday in February this year at a flat in Essex. He'd travelled 30 miles from his own home in Surrey to meet his attacker, 19-year-old Lewis Daines, who pleaded guilty to his murder last week, had befriended him on a gaming forum and was grooming him, turning him against his family. Despite their attempts to alert the police, Brek was killed 2 months later. The case has now been referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. We're joined now by Brek's mother, Lauren Lefebvre. Lauren, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
I mean, in a way, what is shocking above all of this, too, is that you intervened. You thought there was somebody rogue visiting him.
Absolutely. Almost right from the start. I felt like there was something not quite right with this person that was running the server. He had an avatar that didn't look like a normal gaming sort of avatar.
And an avatar, for anyone who doesn't know, is a little sort of model person.
A picture of who they are.
And it was a model boy the same age, roughly as...
Yes, and many boys will have their own picture, but this was a boy who looked quite attractive, and he had a pink bow tie, and I just felt like that wasn't an avatar that boys playing games would actually have. So that alerted me at the beginning.
And you actually spoke to him?
I did. Because the boys were on the server, they were on TeamSpeak. It's a bit like a live Skype program. It's very interactive, and it's a lot of fun. It's really interesting. Brek always had an open door, and I would go in and listen, and I could hear what they were talking about. They were just starting to get a lot of humor between them, and I was quite enjoying it. It was starting to be a bit more intelligent humor compared to what you have when you're younger. And on the outset, it looked quite interesting because they were socializing. They were friends from Brek's school. They had invited him in, and these boys had been gaming and socializing for a while in this way.
But in the end, you managed to persuade Brek not to go on talking to him, but it went on in secret.
Well, I actually forbade Brek from talking to him. What happened was Brek's behavior changed, and he started to not follow sort of family rules, and his ideology was changing. And I could tell it was somebody, and I believed it to be Daines, was trying to change all of the things that we had lived as a family. And Daines was trying to say Brek shouldn't have to do any of those things.
And at this point, you engaged the police?
Yes, after I got so upset one day because I had just had enough with Daines trying to tell me how to raise my child, and he wouldn't show his face. I called the police on December 17th, 2 months before. I gave 30 minutes of information with his name, his alias, the fact that he had no pictures on any of his sites. He told very, very tall tales that were very unbelievable. He said he was 18, but I thought maybe he was older.
Did they refer you to CEOPS, the Child Protection Agency?
They didn't. I didn't actually hear about CEOPS until after Breck's death, and
That's absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I wished I had, contacted them, but
you
now
probably didn't know about them.
I didn't know about them, but now it seems like they're inundated as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the problem.
Yes.
Now, you're starting a foundation. What's the aim?
Yes. Well, it's the Breck Bednar Memorial Foundation. We've named it in his name because I feel I can't believe I've lost my gorgeous son. I have to find a way to help other people and other teenagers to understand the dangers of online predators. It's a very real danger. You know, they may seem like your friends, they may have been gaming with your friends, but if these people won't show their face and, even online, it's a great, you should be highly suspicious. And when we were talking earlier, I loved your idea, as if someone online won't actually show their face, then that's it. You can't be friends if you won't show your true self. I did try to see Dane's
The trouble is you could block them, but he can unblock them. I mean, it's so difficult.
Danes was very controlling and manipulative with the boys, and Breck in particular, because I saw it and heard it firsthand. And for some reason, Breck was under his spell. Breck was impressed that he was going to learn more about technology. He had a passion for computing.
And this drive to make your foundation, is that getting you through what must be an absolutely ghastly...
It's been an absolutely horrible year, the worst nightmare a mom could ever have. But this is helping, and I hope it can help in the future. There's another element, too, is that we want to ensure that government agencies share information and communicate, because there's so many stories, once again, where there was, possibly things to look into, and they weren't looked into properly. So we need to work on that.
Well, Lauren Lefebvre, thank you very, very much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
Still to come, after the news, the winner of the controversial but prestigious Turner Prize will be announced live here on Channel 4. And Russell's rally, a vocal by Mr. Brand, leads protests at Downing Street over fears of evictions at a housing estate.
The devastating conflict in Syria has reached its worst point yet. Over 7 million children are in danger right now. Many have been hurt or seen family killed. These children fled their homes with nothing, and now they face a grave threat. Winter is here. I've seen this crisis for myself. In freezing temperatures, children have no way of keeping warm. They're cold, they're frightened, and they're far from home. Without shelter and warm clothes, children will struggle to survive. Yet just £3 could help provide a child with thermal gloves and a hat. UNICEF is on the ground supplying clean water and medicines and distributing warm winter clothing. Yet more children need our help. This winter, your donation will be matched pound for pound by the UK government. So please, text HAT to 70099 to keep these children safe and warm. Thank you.
This house is 6 foot wide.
This is the living room area. As you can see, it's slightly narrow.
And worth £250,000.
Let's snap it up, guys.
As property prices go through the roof...
No negotiation on prices whatsoever.
Who are the winners and losers? The British property boom, tonight at 8 on 4.
Residents of a housing estate in East London have marched to Downing Street in protest over their fear of eviction. Comedian Russell Brand led the group as it handed over its petition. The US investment company Westbrook Partners plans to refurbish the New Era estate in Hackney. The tenants are worried they'll raise the rent and make the flats unaffordable. Porrick O'Brien went along to the protest to find out more.
Private equity meets public protest. The housing market is not working for these Londoners. Even the dogs on the street know it.
Housing is a human right, not a privilege. What business have an American development firm got?
Along with some celebrity friends, they were outside the offices of American private equity firm Westbrook Partners. They bought the low-rent housing estate in East London where these people live. The fear that they'll refurbish, rejig tenancies and re-let on a higher rent.
There's a global paradox in this local tale, though.
Westbrook are all about purely making money. Ironically, their main shareholders are pension funds in America for public service workers. So it's clearly a paradoxical situation that we're in.
Westbrook, for their part, say they're responsible landlords and the tenancy agreements won't change until next year. Then it was on to Downing Street and a 300,000-strong petition into number 10.
And it's not just Hackney, it's across London, it's across the country. Why are they not building more social housing for people? Why are people being pushed and forced out of London?
I mean, part of the problem is the super rich buying property in London, isn't it? How much did you pay for your place?
It's rented, but like
no.
What
kind of rent are you paying?
Oh, I'm not interested in talking to you about my rent, mate. I'm here to support a very, very important campaign, and you, as a member of the media, have an important duty to help to represent these people.
No, but we
not
are.
To reframe them,
but it's still a point, isn't it? I mean,
the point is
the demand that the super rich are putting on the London property market.
Unless you're proposing, and no, absolutely not. I would completely deny that. I'd say I'm part of the solution. People coming together to amplify the voices of ordinary people. That's precisely what's needed. There's no greater, more expensive piece of real estate in London than that one, and the people in there are the people that have the obligation, mate.
I'd say your house is nearly on par.
Yeah, well, it's rented. We don't know the value. You'd have to talk to my landlord. Blessedly, I can afford my rent, and I'm prepared to stand up for people that can't. It's been lovely talking to you.
People, David Cameron isn't. Lisa Russell Brown's actually standing up regardless of how big his house is and coming down and helping ordinary people.
After the demo in the estate's local, and the Bradleys are talking private equity and the housing market.
None of your kids can afford to live where you live.
3 generations lived in this. 3 generations of this family lived on this estate.
Until now, basically, this is the end of it.
We've already started to split up because of what they're going to do to us.
This story is both local and global at the same time. It speaks to a tension around what happens when people's homes also become a windfall for global investment companies.
There isn't yet a huge tradition or a huge component of large international companies owning residential property in central London, but it is coming. And it's not necessarily a bad thing because they're often very good landlords, they have very high standards.
The estates that these new institutions end up buying will only end up as good or as bad as their new owners. Point is, the Bradleys don't know or trust the new owners of the New Era estate.
10 years from now, Jan, worst possible case scenario, what will it be like?
Dead. It'd just be dead. There'd be nothing here. It'd be gone.
That's all from us. In a moment, the live announcement of this year's Turner Prize winner. But first, that rather chilly-looking weather. What's up? Let's go and find out.
Novotel Hotels sponsors the weather on 4.
Good evening. There's going to be a big change in how the weather feels for all of us this week because across the UK the general theme is that it's going to turn colder, bright skies by day, but it will be frosty with the odd patch of fog by night. Now tonight over Scotland and Northern Ireland, rain will ease away to leave it dry with clear spells for the most part. Just 1 or 2 wintry showers for the mountains of northwest Scotland, but quite a contrast across England and Wales, cloudy, damp and breezy. So here not too chilly, around 4 to 8 degrees, but look at that, Scotland and Northern Ireland, a widespread frost as temperatures widely fall down to freezing and locally just below, the odd icy patch too. So a cold start to tomorrow for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a lovely day there, bright skies, there'll be lots of sunshine, just the odd shower towards the northwest. East Anglia and South East England staying cloudy and damp all day long, but for the rest of England, along with Wales, the sun should be shining by the afternoon. So a little bit more detail, this is 3 in the afternoon, and at this stage of the day for East Anglia, South East England and the Channel Islands, it's cloudy, damp and breezy, but for the rest of England and Wales, it's a lovely afternoon. There'll be good spells of sunshine. Chilly, though, across the board, just 5 or 6 in the north, 8 or 9 further southwards. Now, on Wednesday, a bit drizzly for the far northwest of Scotland and the far southeast of England, but for the rest of us, after a frosty start, it's a fine day. There'll be a mixture of clouds and sunshine, but chilly, temperatures firmly fixed in single figures. That's it from me. Enjoy your evening. Goodbye.
Novotel Hotels sponsors the weather on 4.
Now, let's cross to Lauren Laverne at Tate Britain for the live announcement of the winner of the 30th Turner Prize. Please be warned, the programme may contain flash photography.